of Parliament's Public Accounts Committee, whose committee is now the Star of Parliament, Ezati Kasiano Wadri. He represents Terego County and he's a member of the Forum for Democratic Change. We also have from Soroti Municipality, Captain Mike Mukula. He's from the National Resistance Movement when discussing this fight against corruption. If you look at Uganda's history, you talked about cabinet and you said you didn't want to be associated with a cabinet that is obviously facing all these
the dirty cabinet.
A dirty cabinet, basically. We have seen censures, we have seen resignations, and the word you used, recycling, into the same cabinet. Mr. Wadri, I'd like to come back to you. You read these reports from page to page, from the Auditor General, from the IGG, from other people. You see the cries in media and elsewhere about the performance of government, its failure to deliver on services, its failure to meet the basic demands of the people it employs, teachers, prison warders, policemen, soldiers, because the money is being stolen and it is helping to expand cities and towns across the country. And people asking the question, you in Parliament, you do the investigations, you shout about it, so what? Beyond that, so what?
But you see, as I told you earlier on,
I need to speak close to my microphone.
As I told you earlier on, each of these institutions or arms of governance has its own responsibility and has its own roles and limitations. As a parliament, our roles are very, very clear.
And as a Ugandan,
and
as a member of parliament, for the people you represent in Terego.
I am coming. You see, the problem is if you don't allow me explain myself, then how will you know what is in my heart? So, as I said, we have got limited role. Our role, first and foremost, is to appropriate. Our role, secondly, is to legislate. Our role is to carry out the oversight functions. Once we have done this, and beyond which if we can't go, it is our duty now to take it to the public courts. Because beyond that, what do you do? We cannot assume as a parliament to do the work of the executive. Neither can we assume judicial powers to deal with matters. So the issue is, if we as a country are committed to fighting corruption, so be it. Let every organ of government play its role. As a parliament, once we have exposed the dirt in a system, let the executive interest itself in carrying out further investigations and preferring charges against such kind of people and arraigning them in the courts. Let the judiciary carry out its duties. Beyond that, the best we as a parliament can do is to take it to the public domain.
How can the executive do that if you are shy to point to the executive and say, the problem is here, this is not an isolated incident, and you act like a jury that was closed off for a period of time to try a specific case?
I don't know whether really Parliament as an institution, in the course of executing its roles, as I've earlier mentioned, has been shy. I don't see that. Because if you are really realistically talking about exposure of issues relating to corruption, I think over the last 5 years or so, or 10, Parliament has really exposed a lot of corrupt officials in this country. Look at the Chogam report. How many people did we have?
How much Chogam money has been returned?
How many people did we as a parliament, as a committee and an institution of parliament, find culpable, and we made strong recommendations?
Can I ask the same question?
And then now, this is the thing. If we have done it, the question should now be, what have the other arms of governance done?
Why do you remove yourself? Mr.
Don't also remove yourself.
Why do you remove?
You are part of this country.
Why do you remove yourself and say because you are shielded by an institution called Parliament, then you can't ask the questions of your constituents in Terego?
For example, right now, after we have exposed, and if the executive fails to act, if the judiciary fails to act, do you assume judicial duties? No, you don't.
As a Ugandan, what can you do?
The issue is, okay, you are the people who put these people in power. Yeah, it is
including you.
It is you.
Including you.
Yes, that's why I'm there. But for me, my stand is very clear. So the issue now is, let the Ugandans know now whether the people whom they have put in positions of power are there to serve their interests as a country, or they are there to save their.
But that question is being answered, if I may, Captain Mike Mukula, because I think that Charles is not being fair. Well, the political cycle is every 5 years. Here are the facts, Charles. In the last election cycle, the attrition rate for incumbent MPs was one of the highest we have ever seen. I think like 60% of all MPs
That's true.
lost their seats.
64%.
Including close to 2/4 of that cabinet didn't return. Clearly, the message from the electorate is that you won't be protected, and that is the anger that they show.
I think actually, Angelo, on that aspect, you misread the motivation, the reasons why people don't vote a particular elected official back into office.
No, I'm just saying that the anti-incumbency is a clear message from the electorate. No matter if you take an isolated case, in your village that someone lost because of something specific, like anyway, that is not the case. The point I was making is that the facts there speak for themselves. Also, this government has found itself under siege, and under siege over social services. There have been protests that have been consistent and the most widespread in its entire history in government. And part of what we are seeing in cabinet now is a response, to this problem. So clearly, the political consequences of corruption can be felt by the government being under siege. But also, I find that people who say public inquiries don't yield immediate value forget that there are two things that happen from something that is prosecuted in the public domain. One is that it creates a document trail. Be as it may that government officials say are protected by the politics of the present day. Documentation, first of all, gives us a sense of how corruption happens. Secondly, it means that in the future, prosecutions can be opened virtually against any other public official. And I think that many people recognize today that they can be prosecuted tomorrow. The problem is that the deterrent value is not captured. It's not something that is reflected. A civil servant who today decides to follow procedure because they fear getting caught, the value of his not being corrupt is not reflected. But I think that the sense now, my reading is that many, like Honorable Mike Mukula was saying, is that many government officials will be very careful on how they conduct public affairs, and that is a credit to what the institutions are doing.
Captain Mukula, let me turn to you on this question. The politics of this whole thing. With 10 empty positions in cabinet, well, a cabinet of 73 ministers, it's difficult to notice if 10 are missing, because you still have you still have 63 if attendance was 100%, which is a huge number.
Yes.
But do you get the feeling that, what does it say about the government as it is today? In a different establishment, the government would be literally under siege.
Well, first of all, to me personally, I think that we have a huge cabinet. There's no doubt about that. And those of us who are calling for internal political reforms, that's one of the key areas we're looking at, because the cost of public administration, and I'm very sure that the brothers from Public Accounts and Committee on National Economy and Budget do realize that a lot of money, in terms of trillions, is being spent on public administration. That is money that we could have used to address more critical areas like the social services, improvement of health services, improvement of education, and so on and so forth. But that aside, I think we'll discuss that later at an appropriate time. But the critical point here today is that there is no doubt, obviously, that now that we have a reduced cabinet as a result of the attrition subjected to the executive by the oversight function of Parliament, there is no doubt that the President is bound to make is bound to come up with the changes in cabinet, meaning that he's going to have a mini reshuffle. He's going to appoint new members of cabinet or ministers to replace those that have been displaced. That's number one. Number two is that there is also no doubt that those who are going to come in, especially the new members of the executive, are going to go through a learning curve. What I see is that my colleagues or friends that are in cabinet from the party are going to be very cautious. There is going to be fear to take a decision.
You're saying that cabinet will be paralyzed?
To me, I see that a number of members in cabinet are going to fear really to put anything in writing. You may have a directive given to you by the president. You may have to kick it back to the executive or to the president himself to say that I would like to seek further guidance from you on this matter. Clear instructions.
Absolutely.
Yes, I see that.
I was actually thinking the other day that the president may have been undermining his own position because now people will be afraid. Everyone knows that superior orders have been the modus operandi. But Honorable Mike Mukula, by the way, if you were to meet him somewhere, he might be much more candid in saying how superior orders are communicated.
You mean he's being dishonest with our listeners?
No, I'm just saying that he might be more candid in his characterization of the nature of superior orders. What I thought was dangerous about this particular period, which is good for the executive and bad for it at the same time, is that almost 3 or 4 public officials attempted to entrap the presidency and actually shield themselves on presidential immunity. The president is the only one who can't be prosecuted.
Yeah.
You see, what does the vice president do? He claims before Parliament that his orders came from the president, and because he's a vice president, he's entitled to the same immunity. The court struck it down. Then a trio of other officials came, all claiming the same thing, thinking that if they suggested complicity, that the presidency, will share the immunity with them. Look, this is a very, very, very dangerous precedent and a real disservice, particularly done by the learned Attorney General in his letter. Why, Charles? Here in Africa, we try, because of our political circumstances, as much as possible to make it easy for executives to leave. One of their fears is being prosecuted after they have left power and they don't have presidential immunity. For public officials to attempt to entrap the immunity of the president while the president is still sitting in a political environment like ours is highly irresponsible. But not only that, that's the bad side effects. The other issue now from President Museveni is that anyone he appoints will wait and sit on his hands. So you really have an impotent cabinet before, a cabinet that you need to be active to solve some of the problems that are obvious that you can't do by yourself. Now, what kind of political circumstances?
Let me ask Captain Mukula a quick question to add to this. That the president has been willing to accept the stepping aside of ministers Sam Kutesa, Mwesigwa Rukutana, and John Nasasira. And now he accepts and actually encourages the resignation of Khidu Makubuya and Syda Bbumba. He hasn't done anything about the 4 ministers who were not approved by Parliament's the Parliamentary Appointments Committee. What is he trying? Is it a changed political environment that is forcing him to act the way he's acting? Previously, Museveni would have tried to defend them, done everything possible.
I think what I see is that the president is being sensitive to the feelings of the general public. Is really being more accountable to the people. Secondly, you'll also realize that he does not want to come head-on with Parliament. And if you do realize that immediately a decision was taken on the oil, the resolution number 1, he sought an urgent meeting with the Parliament to address Parliament in order to explain himself. What I see is that, first of all, when you look at the key things, the lessons that you pick from this, is that you're going to have an executive or members of or the executive ministers who are going to be allergic to decisions. You're going to see members of some of them who are going to be impotent politically, failing to take executive decisions. And even on the floor of Parliament, you're going to see many colleagues being vague or being quiet. And, all this makes it very difficult for the executive to function, meaning that the president at certain times will now have to come maybe with a heavy hand in cabinet, maybe to drive his cabinet to take serious action. But so it is really paralysis.
Gentlemen, I'm afraid, Mr. Kasiano, can I come to you after short break?
No, I want to take on where he is.
We'll pick it from there, right from there, after break.
It's live, it's hot, provocative, and digs deep into the issue.